As I prepare to set up my my PowerPoint, could you have your chat ready to share with me? Okay, as we begin today, I have a question that I want to ask you about your future. Do you think that you would like to know what your future is going to be? And just quickly write your answers in the chat. What do you think? If you would like to know what your future holds. I'll just give you a minute. I'm not seeing any chats, and I don't know if I'm not able to see them today.
People are responding, Pastor Roger.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to get to that on my screen, but I'm not able to get to the chat.
It should be near the top,
Yes.
and with the three dots.
Yeah,
on the top right. Click that and then chat.
Oh, okay, very good. Okay, I see several. No. One yes, but oh, there's another couple yes. Oh, there's okay. It seems like it's kind of a mixed bag here of those that would like to know their future and those that wouldn't. So anyways, but in some ways, wouldn't it be good to know exactly when the COVID-19 pandemic is going to be over and when things would get back to normal again? Wouldn't it be helpful for those who invest a lot of money to know what portfolios are going to pay the best dividends? Wouldn't it be nice if the weatherman always knew what the weather was going to be and that the 5-day forecast would be as accurate as his predictions? And I believe that many of us would like to know at least something about the future, because we have the assumption that if we knew the future, we could do some better planning and be more successful. And there are some things about our future that we do have some control over, and we can be pretty sure that things will work out. For example, if we know that if we invest in a good education, it's pretty likely that we'll have a brighter future than if we didn't. We know that if we live healthfully, that as we grow older, that we will continue to be more healthy. And we know that if we make certain decisions about our lifestyle, decisions that are good ones, that we will live a more meaningful and fruitful life. But there are unexpected terms in life for which we cannot be prepared. And how do we deal with those? And if you knew that there are going to be some very difficult times in your future, do you think that you could face those with courage, or would you be tempted to give up in despair? Well, I want us to think for the next few moments about the future of a young man and see if we would walk with him into his future. He was with a group of friends on a 14-mile-long hike. And it would take about a day for them to complete their hike. It's a lonely, sandy stretch of road, and it takes the travelers through a rather treacherous canyon. But it is not the road that should capture our attention. It is where that road is leading, and more importantly, who is walking on that road. It is a band of men walking. And the person who captures our attention, though, is the one who is walking at the front of this band of men. And that's a bit unusual for anyone who knew him. He is usually surrounded by people rather than walking out in front of them. But on this particular day, there is a reason that he is walking out in front of them. You see, the person that is walking out in front of these men is Jesus. This was no leisurely Sunday afternoon hike that he is taking. It is, dare we say it, his final journey, the last major hike that he would ever make on this earth. It was his journey from Jericho to Jerusalem. Jesus has just told that band of men, his disciples, for the third time about this journey that he is on. And this is what he's telling him. And it was in the scripture that Esther shared with us. And again, he says, we're going to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be turned over to the leading priests and teachers of the law, and they will say that he must die. They will give the Son of Man to the non-Jewish people to laugh at him and beat him with whips and crucify him. Now, notice the details that he gives about what is going to happen to him. His immediate future is not a bright one. His future holds a cross of suffering and shame and torture. And yet, even though Jesus knows that this will be his outcome, he still walks on. He has every opportunity to turn back. He could have evaded the issue. He could have stayed in Galilee instead of going to Jerusalem, but he doesn't. He goes on. And there are two kinds of courage. And the first kind of courage is the courage of the moment, where a person is confronted with some emergency or crisis and flings himself into it without time to think. Several years ago, the police chief in Fergus, Ontario, received a distress call. Upon answering that call, he discovered that Amanda Sprague, a 13-year-old girl, had just been swept over a dam, and she was pinned by the force of the water against a pillar. And she was terrified when the police chief arrived. The water was up to her chin, and the police had never seen a child so scared. And so he plunged into the water to be with her, and she pleaded with him, don't leave me, don't leave me. And she kept holding on to his arms. So he stood there with her and holding her head up as she drifted in and out of consciousness. But the police chief knew that he needed more help. And so he made a call for someone else to come to assist him. And thankfully, a 330-pound fireman responded to the call. And when he arrived, he realized the only thing he could do was to plunge into the water. And in order to save the girl, he had to stand in front of that spout of water that was holding the young girl against that pillar. And when he stood in front of it and stopped the water, they were able to lift and rescue that young girl. And after 2 hours, all three of them were able to get out of that very desperate situation. And so these men showed remarkable courage. And we applaud them and thank God that they were willing to answer that call in order to save the life of that teenager. And these men demonstrate the courage of the moment where a person is confronted with some emergency or crisis and flings himself into it without time to think. But then there is a second kind of courage that sees a terrible situation is looming ahead, and the person knows that by turning back, he could escape, but instead he chooses to go steadfastly and inflexibly on. And there's no doubt to which kind of courage Jesus demonstrated in this incident. Jesus going to Jerusalem was courage, not courage of the moment. It was a deliberate courage of facing something that he knew was awaiting him there. And the men that I described in the incident in Fergus became heroes in the heat of the moment. But for Jesus in our text, he was a hero of a different order. In a novel, a writer paints the picture of two children who were walking along the road playing their children's games, and the one says to another, they say, when you're walking along the road, do you ever pretend that there is something terrible waiting for you just around the corner and you've got to go and face it? Oh, it makes it so exciting. Well, with Jesus, it was no game of let's pretend. It was reality. There was something terrible waiting for him just a few miles down the road. And the moment he set foot on that hike, he knew what awaited him. He knew what crucifixion was like. He had seen it. And yet Jesus went on. And that is the courage that Jesus showed. This kind of courage certainly ranks Jesus as the greatest heroes of all times. He knows precisely what was awaiting him when he reached his destination. There was no surprise about what would happen to him when he got there. And there was no hesitation on his part, no faltering. Well, what about us? If you knew that in your future you were going to have to suffer a lot, would you still be willing to keep walking into that future? It certainly would not be easy. And there are many people who right now are struggling with issues just like that. And yet Jesus, knowing full well what lay ahead of him on his final journey, kept on walking to his destination in Jerusalem. And we discover a lot about a person by the way he faces death. And the way that Jesus marched to his death leaves no doubt. He had come to earth for this very purpose. Listen to the words of Peter in Acts 2:23. Jesus was given to you, and with the help of those who don't know the law, you put him to death by nailing him on a cross. But this was God's plan, which he had made long ago. He knew all this would happen. Look at that. This was God's plan, which he had made long ago. He knew all that this would happen. So the thing about it is that Jesus knew that he would one day make that long, fateful journey, long before he ever took the first step on that journey. The road to Jerusalem actually originated in heaven, when God ordained that Jesus would come to earth to redeem the whole human race from the awfulness of sin. So the journey that Jesus made to Jerusalem didn't begin in Jericho. It didn't begin in Galilee. It didn't begin in Nazareth. And it didn't even begin in Bethlehem. The journey that Jesus took to the cross began long before that. And as Max Lucado stated it, as the echo of the crunching fruit was still sounding in the Garden of Eden, Jesus was leaving for Calvary. And the book of Revelation bears up this same thought. Revelation 13:8 speaks of Jesus, the Lamb slain from the creation of the world. Now, for the disciples, it's a different story. Even though Jesus had been warning them of what was going to happen to him in Jerusalem, they were not able to take it in. And they couldn't understand and believe whatever about what he was trying to tell them. And one tells us that after he told them this for the third time, they were still amazed and bewildered and afraid. And they were so conscious of some type of impending tragedy that they were even afraid to go up and walk by his side. And that's why they were walking behind him instead of right there with him. And the kind of fear they had is kind of the fear that people have after an earthquake. They're afraid of being trapped in their homes. And so instead of when night comes and of sleeping in their homes, they sleep out on the street because of their fear of an impending tragedy. And that's kind of the way the disciples were feeling. They were feeling an impending tragedy. And so they couldn't even feel like they could walk close to Jesus. You see, it was not easy to travel that 14-mile distance between Jericho and Jerusalem. And it wasn't easy for the disciples then, and it isn't easy for us now. And I want us to think about the spiritual significance of these cities, Jericho and Jerusalem. You see, Jerusalem is not marked on many maps of life. It's hard to put Jerusalem on our map, because what does that mean? Going to Jerusalem in the sense that Jesus faced it means going from the place of comparative safety to the place of danger, from the place of comparatively little cost to the place of tremendous cost. Many of us don't want to cross that frontier. It takes people like Faith Stewart that we heard about last week that was willing to cross that kind of barrier. But it's easier to stay in Jericho, where things are safe, where things are comfortable, where things are familiar. We don't want to go as far as Jerusalem. We would rather stay somewhere this side of it. So we, like the disciples of that first century, don't like to think about having to make that trip from Jericho to Jerusalem. We think that answering God's call to love and serve him should open up the way to endless bliss. It does, but that endless bliss comes after the hardships. Acts 14:2 reminds us of that. We must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. Hardships, struggles, persecution, discipline, and even death. Maybe not physical death, but death to our old selves. All of those things are par for the course for the Christian. That's just the way it is. So that road from Jericho to Jerusalem is one of the most important roads in our lives. It tests the reality of our commitment to being on the journey with Jesus. When we are willing to walk it, our lives and our actions, we may go from comfort into pain, from ease into jeopardy as Jesus did. But if we don't walk it, if we leave that road, we leave the road that would give us fullness and abundance of life. And people that leave that road with Jesus end up saying, I've lived second class all my life. See, two roads diverged in a wood. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Well, where did or does the power to take the road less traveled by come from? Who or what gave Jesus the power to take that less traveled road? And what or who gave him the power and courage to continue on that road to Jerusalem even when he knew what welcomed him there? Let's look at that text again. We're going to Jerusalem. Then he says, we'll be betrayed. He'll be condemned to death. They'll mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. So Jesus tells his disciples that what faces him in Jerusalem involves all and every possible kind of pain. Pain of his heart, pain of his mind, pain of his body, pain of his spirit. Because he was to be betrayed. And there Jesus would suffer a broken heart through the disloyalty of his friends and followers. He would be condemned to death. And there he would suffer a great injustice, the greatest injustice that has ever been perpetrated upon a person. He was to be mocked by the Romans. He would suffer indignity, humiliation, deliberate insult. And he was to be scourged. And there Jesus would be tortured with intense physical pain. And finally, he was to be crucified. And there he would suffer to the point of death. And Jesus was telling his disciples that he was going to gather in upon himself every possible kind of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual pain into himself. Whatever they inflict upon him, he was going to take it and bear it for us and with us. But there's more to this verse than I originally shared. There's another part to that verse. 3 days later, Jesus told them, he will rise. You see, Jesus never foretold the cross without foretelling the resurrection. Jesus knew that beyond the shame, he was certain that there would be glory awaiting him. He knew what the malice of men could do, but he also knew what the power of God could do. He knew that the power of God can turn the apparent defeat into triumph. The power of God could turn death into resurrection and life. The power of God could turn the cross into a crown. And most importantly for us, the judgment against us into the redemption for us. And John 3:16 and 17 reminds us of that. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. And that is what the power of God can do. And that power enabled Jesus to walk all the way to Jerusalem. And there at the cross, he made it possible for us to be redeemed. He made it possible for us to have our sins forgiven. He made it possible for us to have a new beginning. He made it possible for us to have the new abundant life. Well, the road that Jesus traveled that day was taking him to Jerusalem. But as it turned out, Jerusalem was not the final destination. God came on the scene and lengthened that road. Instead of stopping in Jerusalem and ending there, he added a whole new stretch of road that led right into the new Jerusalem. And all of the followers of Jesus can be on that road. And the first section of that road is the difficult part. That's the section of the road that we are on now. On that section of the road, there is suffering, hardship, there is a cross. But always remember that Jesus once traveled that road. And the good news is that Jesus is still traveling on that road with us. He is still walking ahead, marking out the way before us, strengthening us as we travel it with him. Matthew Huffman is the 6-year-old son of missionaries in Salvador, Brazil. One morning, little Matthew began to complain of fever. And as his temperature went up, he began losing his eyesight. So his father and mother put him in a car and raced him to the hospital. And as they were driving and he was lying on his mother's lap, he did something his parents will never forget. He extended his arm in the air, and his mother took it and gently placed it down at his side. And again, he extended that arm. And again, she gently put it back down. And again, he pulled it up. And confused, the mother asked, "Son, what are you reaching for, Matthew?" "I'm reaching for Jesus," was his reply. "I'm reaching for Jesus." And with those words, he closed his eyes and slid into a coma from which he would never awaken. He died 2 days later, a victim of bacterial meningitis. Now, one of the things that little Matthew didn't have the opportunity to learn in his short life, but he had learned the most important fact. He learned who to reach for in the hour of death. Jesus knew who to reach for in the hour of his death. He looked up to his Father and said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And before Jesus committed his spirit to God, he had given that great shout of victory. It is finished. He had completed the work that he intended to do when he went on that last walk. He finished the work of bringing redemption to you and me. And now, because of Jesus, we know who to reach for, not just in the hour of our death, but we know who to reach for in the hour of our temptation, who to reach for in the hour of our struggles, who to reach for when the load of our responsibility seems too heavy to bear, who to reach for in the hour of our heartaches, who to reach for in the hour of any and every need. We know who to reach for. Amanda Sprague, the 13-year-old in Fergus, didn't know who to reach for in her hour of need, but she did call out. And God heard her call. And by answering the call, a police chief and a fireman were both empowered to rescue her. They heard her cry and rescued her from drowning. And Jesus too knew who to reach for in the hour of his need. And by continuing on his journey to Jerusalem and the cross, he was empowered to rescue us from being drowned by the power and grip of the sin in our lives. But the question for us today is, do you know who to reach for in your hour of need? Do you know this Jesus that little Matthew knew, that he knew who to reach for in his hour of need? Do you know him? And can you trust him to be there for you even when it seems at times that he is so far away? Can you trust him to be there for you? And will you place your trust in him today? Regardless of what you're going through, can you place your trust in him and say, I'm going to reach out to Jesus for his help? And also, we are surrounded by people who do not know who to reach for in their hour of need. Today, when we affirm that we know who we can reach to and for in our hour of need, we have the responsibility to help others to reach for Jesus in their hour of need. And God can help us and guide us and encourage us to help others so that they can reach out for Jesus and find him there ready to help them in their hour of need. In just a few moments, we will be reminded through our participation in the Lord's Supper of the hand that we can reach out to in our times of need. And through Jesus' death and resurrection, he made it possible for us and those we love to be rescued from the power and grip of the sin in our lives. Not only that, but as we reach out for his hand, he will be there to help us in all of our struggles. And as we continually reach out to him, he will empower us to live a bold and effective life, advancing his kingdom and his priorities. So as we listen to this song, Reach Out to Jesus, remember that he is present with us now. He is waiting for us to reach out to him. And so let's remember him in a special way as we partake of the bread and the cup, remembering the grace that has come to us as we have reached out to him. Reach out to Jesus. Sing along, please.